Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Joining me today is Swayne, our AncestryDNA program manager. So of course, we're going to talk about DNA. Welcome.
Thank you.
So this is specifically the part 2 video of the FAQ that we did a few months ago. And we promised you all that we would be talking about ethnicity estimates and DNA matches. So we've combed through lots of questions and kind of boiled them down to about 3 questions per topic, 3 for ethnicity, 3 for DNA matches. And Anna and I are just going to go through those one at a time.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's dive in. So these are the DNA ethnicity estimate questions that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about how AncestryDNA determines your ethnicity estimate. We're going to talk about how we can tell which ethnicities we inherited from each parent, if that's possible, and then why sibling estimates might be different. And then we're going to talk about why ethnicity doesn't match the paper trail. So the first question is, how is the AncestryDNA ethnicity estimate determined? Anna, I'll let you go ahead and field that question.
Okay, so the ethnicity estimate is determined by you taking a DNA test, of course, and us comparing your DNA to the different populations around the world that we have collected data on. So you can see from this map, there's 26 different regions that we compare your DNA to determine where in the world your ancestors are from.
So how did we come up with these 26 regions?
So these 26 regions were developed by us collecting DNA samples from the different regions. So we've gone out to all over the world, collected these DNA samples from people who have a long history in that region. And then we've developed a reference panel, and this reference panel then represents these people from these regions. Then we can take your DNA and compare it to that region. So that's how we can say you're 10% Scandinavian, 5% Iberian Peninsula, whatever it is.
Excellent. Okay. So our next question is, how can I tell what ethnicities I inherited from each parent? And kind of a subset of that is, will sibling ethnicities be the same?
Okay, so you really can't tell what you got from which parent unless that parent gets tested. And even then, you know, it's really getting both parents tested will give you the best idea.
Okay.
You've had both of your parents tested.
I have had both of my parents tested, and I've also had one of my grandparents tested. I have one living grandmother. She just turned 93 a couple weeks ago, so I had her tested a couple of years ago. And interestingly enough, she and my father do not have identical ethnicities, right? Because my father got half his DNA from her and half of his DNA from his father. But I can kind of tell, you know, some of the things that she passed on to him. And one of the reasons is because I've also had one of my father's siblings tested. So talk to me about why sibling ethnicities aren't always identical.
So it all is based on genetic inheritance. Like you said, your dad didn't get exactly what your grandma had. And that's because she only gave 50%. So when you look at parents, they have 100% of their DNA. That's why it's best to get them tested. But they only pass 50% to each child. And it's a random 50% each time. And I think that's what some people forget. They think, oh, my brother doesn't need to be tested, or my sister doesn't need to be tested because it's going to tell me the same thing. And that's not correct.
Yeah, it's that random versus that even. You take 100% of somebody's DNA, and they don't just cut it in half and pass on half to each child. It is a random 50% of that 100, and so one sibling gets one random 50%, and another sibling gets another random 50%, and so on and so forth.
Yes, and it's all based on genetic inheritance. Completely random.
Yeah, I think we talked about that in the first FAQ video a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at the chart behind us. Oh, sorry. If you look at the chart right here, you can see that two parents, if they have their DNA tested and they have then, you know, so many children, you can see the probability of the different ethnicity mixes being passed down. And it most likely will be different with each child, which is fun because as you get other family members tested, you know, it just randomly depends on what you get. You can, you know, have bragging rights.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a red-haired, green-eyed, freckle-faced brother, and I am more Irish than him, and I take great pride in that.
See? There you go. And you wouldn't know that unless you had a DNA test.
Right. Okay. Our next question is, why doesn't my ethnicity match my paper trail?
We get this question often. And so one way I always think about it is DNA, the ethnicity estimate goes back 500 to 1,000 years ago. So oftentimes it confirms some of the research you have done and possibly gives you new leads to go down a different path because those regions, you just hadn't thought about those regions in a way because your paper trail was in a certain direction.
Right.
So
yeah, and the other thing that we sometimes struggle with is this concept of countries versus regions, right? A lot of people, I hear a lot of questions about German ethnicity, for example. My grandparents are German, my great-grandparents were all German, whatever the case may be. But Germany as a country really, was only formed, I think, in like 1867 or something, right? So before that, it was a series of kingdoms. There was a lot of invasions. There was a lot of migration in and through Central Europe. And so somebody who may have lived in Germany for, the last 200, 300, 400 years of their family history on paper may actually have lots of different regional ethnicities that play into that because of the history of that particular region.
Exactly. And I think it's good to take that into consideration because some people will say, oh, my grandfather was 100% Irish or German. And it's like, well, go back 500 years. Were they still living in Germany or were they still living in Ireland, wherever the region is? And sometimes we can't even go back that far. So I think it's good to keep that in perspective as we start to understand our ethnicity results and what they're telling us.
Right. And so that's certainly true if we're talking about some of the nuances between some of these regions like Great Britain or Scandinavia or Europe West, where you don't inherit genes from everybody, from every one of your ancestors all the way back through time. And some of those genes do come from way back in time. But if your ethnicities are completely different than what you expected, right? For example, if you have a large percentage of Asian or a large percentage of African American or a large percentage of Native American that you weren't expecting. Or the converse is also true if you're an African American and all of a sudden you have a large percentage of European that you weren't expecting. When you see really big differences in what you were expecting, that could be a clue that you've been climbing someone else's family tree, right? That your paper trail is not accurate. One of the things that we say sometimes in DNA or in genetic genealogy is that DNA doesn't lie, but people do, right? And so the record that you have of your grandfather, you may have a birth certificate even that lists the names of his parents. That doesn't mean that's really who his parents were. So DNA just provides additional evidence or additional clues that will help validate or invalidate that paper trail.
And ethnicity is just like a fun topic. It's a fun, interesting thing to get an idea. It's easy to digest. And so, I think take it for what it is.
Right.
And as we get more research, those results may change and update.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, in the next section of our video today, we are going to talk about DNA matching. So we talked about the ethnicity estimate a little bit. The other part of your DNA result is the match list, where we compare your DNA with everybody else in our database. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that process, how those DNA matches are determined. Another question we get a lot is how AncestryDNA categorizes different relationships. So we'll cover that. We'll also look at the tools that are currently available with AncestryDNA to work with your DNA matches to prove or disprove genealogically significant information. And then we'll talk about, in closing, just about the benefit of having a family tree or of including what you know about your family tree. The first question under our AncestryDNA matches section is, how are AncestryDNA matches determined? So Anna, can you walk us through that process?
Yes. So your DNA is compared to everyone else who has taken a DNA test. And right now we have over 1 million people in the database. That's a lot of people. So your DNA gets compared to me, gets compared to you, all your family members. And then depending on how much DNA you share with any individual in the database, we'll then estimate a relationship. And we'll then categorize it, first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, whatever. But it's all based on DNA. I can't stress that enough. I get the question all the time, do you use my tree to help make the matches? And the answer is no, it's strictly on genetics. And so we take your DNA, compare to anyone who has taken a test, anyone who will take a test, and then populate your match list.
Okay, so a couple of things about that match list. One is if they're on your list, particularly if they're on that fourth cousin level or higher, and we'll talk about those levels, but you're genetically related to this person.
You share DNA.
Okay,
Yeah.
so figuring out how then becomes kind of the challenge, but you share DNA with this person. The second thing is, and it seems kind of silly to have to say this out loud sometimes, but I get this question a lot because I think people don't quite grasp it when they're new, which is, if somebody has not taken a DNA test, they're not going to show up on your DNA match list.
That is correct.
Right?
That
So people ask all the time, well, my first cousin isn't showing up. Well, has your first cousin taken the Ancestry DNA test? And if they haven't, that's why they're not showing up on your list.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have more than 1 million people in the database. We compare your DNA to everybody who's taken the test. And then as new people take the test, we also compare your DNA. So I could be getting new matches every day.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why it's good to come back and check often, because the database is growing so fast.
Okay,
It's
awesome.
very exciting.
Our next question has to do with the different relationships and how we label them or categorize them in your AncestryDNA match list. So we have several different categories. Can you just walk us through what the category labels are going to show up as, and then what that means the relationship could be?
Yes. So depending on how much DNA you share with any one of the individuals, we'll give you, we'll categorize it into these little buckets. So you have parent-child match, which is either your parent or your child.
And that's really the only thing that can be in that category.
Yes.
If someone shows up in that category, they are either your parent or your child.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Okay.
And then we have immediate family. So immediate family will include your full siblings. And so I'm sure you had when your siblings were tested, they all showed up in the immediate family
Yep.
category. And then close family. This is where it gets a little more broad. Close family can include grandparent, grandchild, aunt, uncle, half-sibling, niece and nephew.
Okay.
And then first cousins, second cousins, and third cousins, we're really good at predicting. But you have to remember, when you get into these half relationships, they can fall into that first cousin relationship. Yeah. And even great aunts and uncles can fall into a first cousin relationship, even second cousin relationship. Just depends on how much DNA you share. So just because you get a second cousin relationship, don't think, oh, this means we share second great grandparents. It could mean it's actually your mom's uncle, or something like that.
So half relationships can affect how much DNA you share with a person, and by that we mean, for example, in my family recently, my mother just discovered a new half sibling. That was kind of a surprise. Came up as a close family member, but that individual shows up to me. That new aunt shows up as a first cousin to me, even though my mom's full sister shows up as close family. I hope that's not confusing everybody. But it's because my aunt has the same two parents as my mother. And so I share a set amount of DNA with this full aunt. My new half aunt only has my grandfather in common with me, right? Because she has a different mother.
Yep.
And so we share less DNA. So genetically, our scientists don't know what's in our tree, right? All they know is you share this much DNA, so we're going to categorize it as this. And so half relationships affect this, and then also removed relationships affect this.
Yes.
So somebody could be categorized as a second cousin when really they're a first cousin 2 times removed.
Yep.
And that's sometimes a confusing concept for people who are new to genealogy. We do have lots of charts. If you go to our Pinterest account, we have a chart about what exactly it means to be removed. But the easiest answer is, to be removed means you're in a different generation. So if I'm first cousins with somebody, that means we're in the same generation, we have the same grandparents. If I'm a second cousin, it means we have the same great-grandparents. But if I'm a second cousin once removed, what that means is it's my second cousin's child. So different generation. Second cousin twice removed would be my second cousin's great-grandchild. And those, again, affect how much DNA we share with somebody or don't share with somebody. So we give these labels based on how much DNA we share, but we need to be aware that there are many different types of relationships that could fall into that particular category.
Yep. And again, it's just based on how much DNA.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about these fourth cousin and distant cousin labels. They have a little bit of a broader range of possibilities. Can you explain a little bit about why that is?
Yeah, so fourth cousins, we label it fourth cousins, but in the description it'll say fourth to sixth cousins, but then we give you an extra confidence label. So you'll see, extremely high confidence, high, And then good, I think, is kind of, and there's a thing, and there's a graph in there for you to see. But that's trying to help you, kind of sort out what are the priority matches. You want to go for those extremely high ones. But that's, again, it's all based on a range of how much DNA you share with an individual. So we say fourth cousins based on how much DNA you share, but it really could be a strong, sixth cousin relationship. Just like I have cousins that says we're fourth cousins genetically, but really we're third cousins on paper.
Right.
So, it's one of those things where it gives you an idea and a ballpark range for, looking into, but keep an open mind of it could be, something more distant or something more close, especially at these distant cousin matches. I know people that won't even look at distant cousin matches, and I'm thinking, there's still value because you still share DNA. So look at those high confidence distant cousin matches. Even though you'd only share a little bit of DNA, they can still provide value to your own research.
Yeah, and the thing is that it comes back to that random inheritance of DNA, right? I get 50% of my father's DNA. He got 50% of each of his parents' DNA, but I may end up with more of my grandfather's DNA versus my grandmother's DNA. And so I might look more closely related to cousins on my paternal grandfather's side of the family than I do on my paternal grandmother's side of the family. And when you multiply that by how many cousins you have at each level, that's why we end up with these broad ranges kind of down in the bottom of the bucket.
You're
But
right.
like you said, they do still have value. So
Yep.
excellent.
Yes.
Our next AncestryDNA matches question is, what tools are currently available for me to work with my AncestryDNA matches? So we do provide quite a few tools on the site. Anna, if you could just walk us through what each of these buttons does on the site.
Yeah, so you can see there's options. So when you're going to review a match, we really encourage you to link your DNA to your tree. So you start a family tree. If you're new, just start with what you know. Put something out there and link that tree to then your DNA test. Because what that will do, like Crista said, you share DNA, but now the question is, who gave you that DNA? Who's a common ancestor that passed that DNA down to the both of you that's making you link? So by linking your tree, we'll then provide you with these tools that will help, at least two of the tools on here. Pedigree and surname is pulling information from your tree and from your matches tree that you have in common. So surnames that you have in common from both of your trees. And that's valuable because, a lot of time we're searching for a specific surname, but we know that surnames change or they get misspelled, whatever it is, things happen. And so then we provide maps and locations, birth locations from your tree. So birth locations that you have in your tree and birth locations that you have in common with your matches tree will pull that information in a list. So each of these tabs provide you that information, but you have to have a tree linked to your DNA test to get the value from it, which is awesome because, when you're dead end in Virginia and you don't know if you changed a surname, you can go concentrate on all your DNA matches with
Who might be born in a specific county.
County, state, start out broad, but you can get more specific.
And what that means is that when we enter information into our family tree, we need to be consistent about how we enter those locations. There are standards, genealogical standards, about how we enter locations. That location should be, town, county, state, country, and you spell all those things out. You don't abbreviate the state. You make sure if you don't know the county, you go find it out. If you don't know the name of the town, at least put in the name of the county, whatever the case may be, because the more consistent we are in that and the more we follow that standard, the easier it is for our computers to look at your tree and then your matches tree and actually say, hey, this is really the same place.
Yeah. And then the middle one, which is the newest one to this, is shared matches. And you don't technically need a tree linked to have this feature. You can do it on any one of your matches. When you go to review the match, you can pull all the matches you have in common with that particular match. Now the value for this is, for me, especially when people have private trees or no tree, and you can click on this and you can see what other matches they have in common with you. Now this is excellent if you've had another family member tested, because let's say you have some matches that don't have trees or their tree's private and you've had a parent tested. You go ahead and click on shared matches, and if they share then DNA with your mom, it's on your mom's side. If you share DNA with your dad, it's on your dad's side. And then you can get even smarter and get, additional first cousins tested to be able to narrow down and get specific on those lines. Because if they share in common DNA with your first cousin on your mom's side, it's on that line, or at least that's a good indication it's on that line.
Yeah, so the shared matches, like you mentioned, is a new tool, just came out. It is available on any match, but it only shows you fourth cousin matches or closer that you have in common. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at that. Sometimes I look at some of my matches, I click that shared matches button, it says no matches in common. And it's not because I can't tell whether it's my dad's side or my mom's side. It's just that we all fall into that distant matches bucket. And right now we're only surfacing that for fourth cousins and closer. These 3 buttons are going to show up when you go in to actually review or view your match. We do have some buttons or some filters that show up when you're just viewing your entire match list. Can you talk us through these?
So these filters will show up on your match page when you go click on review your matches. You have your list of matches. You can filter quickly through some of your matches by checking out these filters. The first one is hints. Now these hints are, if you've linked your DNA test results to your tree, what Ancestry tries to do is it'll go looking through, finding the common surnames and the common birth locations in your tree and in your matches tree, but then they take it one step further and they try to identify the same person. So if you click on hints, what will show up is the common ancestor that Ancestry has found in your tree and the same person that you have in the matches tree. So let's say Crista and I show up as fourth cousins. We have a hint. We have the shared ancestor hint given to us, and they've identified, William Brown in my tree and in your tree. And there's a special algorithm they use for this. It's kind of technical, but you have to have the same name, same birth date, even the same parents in some cases. They double check that as well, and then they serve it up to you as a hint. And it's a great tool to quickly digest possibly where the common ancestor is between you and your matches. Now, it's not a for sure, so don't stamp it as, oh, this is who gave us this DNA that's matching us. You need to go and double check it, and again, it's just a hint.
Yeah, my mom comes from the southern United States, is where her family is from. Lots of intermarriage.
Oh.
And so I actually have a couple of DNA matches on my mom's side of the family, where when I review those hints, we actually have 2 sets of shared ancestors. And so to determine whether that DNA came from this set of ancestors or this set of ancestors or both, right, is not as easy. One of the things I have found helps make that a little bit more clear is to actually use the hints feature in conjunction with the shared matches feature.
Yes.
Because if I have a genetic match and I have a hint to a set of ancestors or a couple of sets of ancestors, and then I look at that shared matches list and they're all from this side of the family, right, that becomes, again, another piece of evidence to our genealogical, our information in our tree that we're on the right track, that we've got the right people and that they're all assigned in the right places.
Exactly, and that's really what we're trying to do with these tools and features, is just try to give additional evidence to the user so that they can, piece it together.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's great about DNA being a tool and a resource for people, and it's becoming more and more popular, which is very exciting for me. That means more matches.
Yeah. Yeah, the more matches, the more people take the test, the more likelihood we have of getting matches, the more matches we have to work with, the more evidence we have to our family tree.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So if you haven't checked out hints, do that. The next one is new. There's a blue dot, so you can say you want to look at the last 7 days of new matches. You can click on new. It'll pull all the matches you haven't looked at
Anything you
before.
haven't reviewed.
Anything you haven't looked at. And that's why you see the blue dot on some of the matches that maybe you haven't seen. It's because of that. It's because you haven't reviewed it. And then the star feature, you can filter by all the stars that you've done. And that's something you actively had to go and do and click on. So you can star all your, some of the matches you're interested in going to check out. People have different methods, so find out what's best for you. I know for all the hints, I star my hints because people switch trees when they're linking, and so sometimes my hints disappear. So if you've had people that have, they were a hint and then they disappeared, it's not because we took that away. Someone just may have switched their tree or changed the information.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I use my stars. My method is if I have validated the information, if I've checked their tree, if I've compared them to my other matches and determined this is valid and this is really how we're related, I will actually enter my match into my tree as a descendant of that couple. And once I have entered them into my tree, I star them to know that I've done the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to use that. Then we have these two new filters, mother and father. Now, if you've had a parent tested, these will show up. If you have not had your mom or your dad tested, these will not show up. But you've had your parents
I've
tested.
had both parents tested.
So you see mother and father. Now, if you just had your mother tested, you just see mother.
Yeah, when I go in to view my dad's results, for example, because I've had his mother tested, all it shows is the mother button.
Exactly.
But I love that because my grandfather is deceased, and so I haven't been able to test him, but I've tested my dad and his mom. So I can compare their lists, click on that mother button. It shows me every match that my dad has in common with his mother. And the assumption is then anything they do not have in common likely comes from his father's side of the tree. So even though I don't have my grandfather's DNA, I am able, because I have tested one grandparent, to kind of start to sort through those matches in my father's.
Exactly. And again, this is about assigning where this match may or may not fit. Maybe you will never identify the common ancestor, but getting additional family members tested, especially your parents, will help provide that value if either it's on your mom's side or on your dad's side. So using those filters will quickly decide and separate it out that you share this match with mom or with dad.
Excellent. So the last button we have here on the filter toolbar is our search matches button. If I click that, it actually slides over and I get a couple of search features. And just really quickly, can you tell us what those search features are?
Search features are you can search by surname and you can search by birth location or both. So you can get really specific and say, okay, I want to search just the Cowans in Atlanta, or you just want to search all the Cowans. So what this does is it pulls your genetic list and finds all the Cowans that have that surname in their tree.
Right.
And the location.
So yeah, I love using this. For example, my mom's Lawrence family, they're Southern Lawrences. They come from Georgia, as opposed to there are several Northern Lawrence families. So if I just did a surname search for Lawrence, it would pull up everybody in my match list who had a Lawrence in their tree,
common,
whether I was related to that Lawrence, that particular part of their tree or not. And allowing me to filter them by location, I can say, show me any Lawrence who was born in Georgia. It filters that list down even tighter, so I can start to look through those and see if that's how I'm genetically related to this particular match.
And be patient, because there are going to be some matches that you may just not find a connection yet.
Yeah.
And by getting additional family members tested, it helps kind of identify and line it up. But I get questioned all the time. I can't find a connection with this match. And I say, be patient.
Yeah.
Look for these common surnames, look for the birth locations, and then get other family members tested. That's what you can do. That's the best.
Okay, one of the last tools that we have available to show today is the notes feature. So when I'm on my all matches list and I click through to review any given match, one of the things I can do is that I can actually leave a note on that match's account. I leave notes for all sorts of different things. If I know that this person, for example, matches my father but doesn't match his mother, I might make a note that it doesn't match my grandmother, so that I know to be looking at my grandfather's side of the tree. If I have discovered that they have some shared matches in common, I might make a note of that. Once I have discovered who the connection is, I will make a note of that. Here's the common ancestors, here's the actual relationship as opposed to just the genetic relationship. And the benefit of that is then, when I go back to my list of all matches, anybody I've left a note on, there is now going to be a little note icon in my list of matches that says I have a match. And I can click on that note icon and it will show me the note, without having to click through to the match and wait for the page to load. So I love that feature, just to be able to quickly click through my list and see who these people are, or what notes I have that I haven't had action on yet. If I've got a note without a star, for example, I know I've done some research on this, but I haven't figured out the connection yet. So
see, is a great tool and a great system, to place these things in. And I think a lot of people don't realize there is a note, because they have to click on the match and then right underneath the name they can add the note.
Right. Okay.
Excellent.
Our last question today about Ancestry DNA matches is, what benefit is it to me to attach my DNA results to my family tree? So we did talk a little bit about that in our last segment, but let's just review really quickly all of the different terminology that we use to make sure everybody's on the same page. And then as we review this, Anna, if you'll just point out what needs a tree to work and what doesn't need a tree to work.
Okay, so the DNA matches everyone gets, whether you have a tree or not. And again, I can't stress it enough. We only determine your matches based on your DNA. We don't use your tree. So DNA matches, and then shared matches. This is also referred to as the button,
in common with,
button. And so you don't need a tree for that as well. You can, just go to any one of your matches, click the shared match button, and it'll pull the matches you have in common with that person. So no tree for that. And then you have the shared ancestor hints. This you do need a tree because you remember it's pulling the same person you have in your tree and you match has in their tree. We think we found the same person. So obviously we definitely need a tree, and there's a lot of value to that. So link your tree if you haven't, and make sure you're linked the right person in your tree to your DNA results. I've seen that a few times lately where people think they've linked their tree, but it's to the wrong person. So just double check that.
Yeah, make sure that you've linked it to you, not your spouse, or that you've linked it to you, not one of your parents or grandparents if they're not the one who took the test. You link the DNA test to the person in the tree who took the test. What that also means, though, is that you need to have the ancestry of the person who took the test in the tree.
Yes.
I know a lot of people, for whatever reason, have multiple trees. They have a tree for dad's side and a tree for mom's side, or 4 trees, one for each grandparent or whatever. And that gets a little bit cumbersome for them to manage. It also gets a little bit cumbersome for our system because you can only link it to one tree.
Yep.
Our system's comparing trees to trees in these million users we have, right? I think the last number I heard was something like 4 million shared ancestor hints in these close relationships, and that's a lot of computing power.
Yeah.
And so one tree is how you're going to get the most benefit out of these shared ancestor hints and the computing power behind the scenes that's working for you. And so you need to make sure that the person who took the test is in the tree and that that's who you attach those test results to.
Yep, yeah, and no problem if you have in the past, just double check it.
And then we've got 2 other things. We have done a whole video on this, but just briefly, can you explain DNA circles and new ancestor discoveries?
Yeah, so DNA circles is like this great new networking power behind DNA. So you have DNA that you share with, a whole list of people. But out of that list of people, who matches you and matches your other matches? So it's like taking the shared ancestor match tab a step further, because it's all centered around a common ancestor. So you have shared ancestor hints with individuals. Maybe you have several. I think you told me one time you had like 60 something.
I'm up to about 300 shared ancestor
Okay,
hints.
I don't have that many, so I have like 30. And what that does is it looks for people that you share DNA with and have a same common ancestor identified by a shared ancestor hint. And then it looks for other people that you also share DNA with and shares your DNA with your match and has that same common ancestor. So it's like building this really cool, awesome network of people that you share DNA with.
Around a common ancestor.
All around a common ancestor. And so that's what powers the DNA circle. Now, I get questioned, why don't I have a DNA circle? How do I get one? So we have a whole video on how to do that. But really quickly, it takes three different family units. And a family unit is made up of second cousins or first cousins once removed or closer. So I can't be in a circle with me and my mom and my sister. We're considered one unit. But if we have a second cousin and another second cousin tested, then we'd form a circle because it's all centered around then our second great grandparent.
Okay, so 3 family units. The other qualification is your tree has to be public.
Yes.
So you have to have your DNA results attached to your tree, and that tree has to be public. And the trees of each of those other 2 family units also has to be public.
Yes.
So if your tree's private, or if any one of those other people's trees are private, that means no circle will be created.
Correct.
So public trees is also a big part of that.
And then the new ancestry discoveries, that's essentially what that means is we're hinting you in, that's what I like to explain it, you're hinting you into a DNA circle of an ancestor that you don't have in your tree. So you match DNA with people in the circle and we think, oh, this might be valuable for you. You don't have the person in your tree, but you match people in that circle, go check it out.
Yeah.
So a new ancestry discovery, just a new lead into a possible common ancestor.
Okay, excellent. So for people, one of the questions we get in relationship to this concept of do I need a tree, do I not need a tree? You can see here we have features that we use that do not require a tree because it's solely based on DNA. We have features where if you have a tree, you can participate in these extra features that allow Ancestry's computers to do some of the work for you. So one of the questions I get has to do with people who don't have a tree. And by that I mean people who are adopted or who are looking for biological family, or maybe they know who their birth mom is, and they have her tree, but they don't know who dad is, whatever the case may be. And my recommendation is always create a tree anyway,
Yeah.
right? And one of the ways that you can do that is you can put in your name and information. If you're living, that will be privatized, so your matches will just see the word private in your tree. And then put unknown parents and unknown grandparents into your tree and mark them as deceased. And what that does is it notifies your matches that you don't know. Right? That it's not just that you haven't linked a tree or that you haven't taken the time to put that information online and making it accessible to everybody, but it's that you're actually looking. And whenever I see that in one of my matches, I always become a little bit obsessive about helping them. And what you'll find, for those of you who are searching for biological family, is that the genealogy community is super supportive and willing to rally around people.
Yeah.
And DNA is one way that we're solving a lot of those genealogical questions, whether it's you that is adopted or whether it's your great-great-grandfather that was adopted. We're seeing some of those things start to happen. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Anna, for joining us. I always love the information that you share, and you're always really clear in how you explain things, and I think that that's super useful. If you have topics that you would like to see addressed in future episodes of our show, or if you have additional DNA questions specifically, you can send them to ask@ancestry.com. Anna and I will review those, and if we need to do another video, we'll do another video. We're happy to provide whatever training or information it is that you need to make you successful in working with your DNA matches and in building your family tree. So until next time, this is Crista Cowan and Anna Swayne. Thank you for joining us. Have fun climbing your family tree.